What's going on, everybody? Today we're here for a quick project update, but also to talk about lumber prices, where they've been in the past and where they're going, and 14 thoughts and reasons why the prices are where they are today and where they're going to be going. Let's take a look. Number one, prices is driven largely by supply and demand. Demand is way outstripping supply right now, so from a strictly economic perspective, that is one reason why we're seeing lumber prices being much higher. Number two, the US has been underbuilding for the last decade, and they're now trying to catch up, which is driving more of that demand. Number three are tariffs. In April 2017, the US imposed a 20% tax on Canadian lumber imports, which account for 30% of the current supply of lumber imports. The US government's stance on this was that Canada was actually subsidizing this lumber because most of their lumber is actually made by the Canadian government, so we're trying to drive more lumber to the US mills. However, the US mills don't have the capacity to meet the current demand. Number four was cutting back of supply before the pandemic. In 2019, lumber yards started to cut back their current supply of lumber output, and then when the pandemic hit, they projected less supply coming out of the pandemic. So because they had a lower supply to begin with and then projected even less after COVID hit, they're really behind the eight ball on the supply side of lumber. Number five is COVID in general. Mills had to ramp down their current production of lumber, and then when they were able to start opening up from COVID, they were ramping up at a very slow pace. So the supply of lumber has been significantly lagging since last March. Number six is wildfires. Wildfires are not a cause of lumber shortages. We don't have a logging problem right now. We actually have an oversupply of logs, which leads us into number seven, is the sawmill production. Building a new sawmill can take $100 million and can take years to get online. So if you wanted to start producing more lumber right now because you see this as an opportunity, it's just not possible. Investment in sawmills can be very risky because years from now, we may not have the current demand for lumber and it could be a losing investment. Number eight is staffing. The lumber yards and the sawmills are having a hard time staffing their production lines. It's very tedious and dangerous work, and it also doesn't pay well. We're seeing a parallel of this in the restaurant industry, where they're also struggling to find quality workers. Number nine, we talked about this in a prior video, is the beetle infestation. The beetle infestation is running wild in British Columbia, hurting the current raw materials and supply for these lumber yards. Number 10, in the US South, there's actually an overabundance of logs. However, we just can't get these logs through the sawmill capacity fast enough. This is an interesting point because once we start meeting capacity, will we see lumber actually fall to really low prices because of the abundance of raw materials in the southern logging area. Number 11, there's a huge gap in the distribution of wealth right now. The sawmills are making all the money. There's been other videos out there about loggers not making their fair share of money with this lumber boom. They're actually getting hurt because of that oversupply of logs. Number 12 is collusion. Similar to OPEC in the oil industry, lumber is controlled by a small number of people, and through some collusion you can kind of keep those prices inflated. Number 13 is lumber has risen everywhere all across the globe. Lumber and building materials have seen an all-time historic rise, whether it be from shortages from supply or just general inflation. We'll see how this plays into future building and demand for building and renovations, and when we see a slowdown in that, because eventually someone's going to stop doing a project because of the general cost of doing that project. Number 14 comes to housing starts. We've been severely undersupplied in the US for decades. However, we saw a 13% decrease in April housing starts compared to historical data. Will we start seeing housing starts slow down as we see all these raw materials rise? Continue monitoring this and come back with a future update.